Good evening and welcome to the 2026 Stratford Lecture. I'm Katie Larsen, Executive Director of Lived Experience at Mind Australia. My pronouns are she, they. I proudly bring to this work a lived experience of mental health distress, queer identity, and my work is informed by the collective knowledge base of lived experience and of marginalised people and communities. We are delighted to be back in Melbourne this year for this year's event after a trip to the harbour city, Gadigal country, last year. It was delightful, very pretty, but it's good to be home. Tonight we're here at The Edge, a beautiful venue, as you can all see, sitting on the banks of the Birrarung here on Wurundjeri country. It's a place that holds many stories, it holds the context of history, and it holds plenty of space for big ideas. Just a couple of elements of housekeeping. We do have Deb Colin is up the back there. If anyone does want to access peer support or just have a quiet chat, Deb is there. Emergency exits are these little exits here. And if you do need the bathrooms, head straight out the back there. To commence this year's event, I would like to invite Wurundjeri Elder Colin Hunter Jr. to welcome us to country.
Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome. It is my honour and privilege to be here today. My name is Colin Hunter IV. I would like to start off by acknowledging that this evening we are on Wurundjeri country, home of my ancestors and also home to everybody here today. I wish to pay my respects to both elders past, present and emerging, elders from all nations, especially all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community members joining us here tonight. Wurundjeri is a part of the Kulin Nation and of the Wurrung language group. Wurundjeri country extends from the inner city of Melbourne across to the Great Dividing Range, west to the Werribee River, south to the Mordialloc Creek and east to Mount Baw. A big thank you to everybody who has helped make this event possible this evening. Wurundjeri, welcome, and I hope everybody has a fantastic night ahead. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
So tonight is a celebration of lived experience leadership, where we of course are honouring the legacy of Anthony Stratford, a lived experience leader both here at Mind, across Australia and internationally. It's a night where we celebrate the lived experience work that is already happening, the leaders that have come before us, that are driving the work now, and those that will do so into the future. It's a night where we celebrate the way that we come together to do this work across all disciplines and backgrounds, and what the potential, meaning and impact of it is. When I look around this space tonight, I see an incredible cross-section of people, representatives from government, clinical partners, community organisations, peaks and advocates from Victoria and interstate. Great change takes all of us, finding the moments and never giving up on the vision of transformation. There's no greater example of that than the work that we've been doing to develop Victoria's first lived experience residential service. We'll touch on that later, but I wanted to say that foundational to that has been the support of Victoria's Minister for Mental Health, Ingrid Stitt MP. I'm so pleased that we have the Minister here this evening and would like to welcome you, Minister, to join us for some opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we're meeting on this evening, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my deep respects to elders past and present. And can I also thank Colin Hunter Jr. for his very generous welcome to country. Can I also warmly welcome people here with lived and living experience who are joining us at this evening's event. And I want to acknowledge the consumers, the carers, families and supporters whose voices really light the way for a stronger and much more responsive and more compassionate mental health and wellbeing system here in Victoria. And thank you for your leadership in helping us drive the change that we know is required throughout our mental health system for the well-being of all Victorians who interact with that public mental health system. I'd also like to acknowledge Professor Alan Fells, the board chair of Mind Australia, and of course Gill Callister, the CEO, and Katie Larsen, who you all know very well, the Executive Director of Lived Experience at Mind Australia. And it's really a great pleasure to be able to join you briefly this evening for the 2026 annual Stratford Lecture. And this lecture does honour an extraordinary legacy of Anthony Stratford, a visionary, an advocate and a tireless champion for lived experience. His work challenges all of us to think differently about power, voice and who shapes our systems. For more than 45 years, Mind has stood alongside people experiencing mental health and wellbeing challenges, embedding compassion and humanity into our community-based supports. And I did want to also touch on the important work that Mind are driving with the Lived Experience residential service. And that is a trial that puts lived experience at the centre of care and explores new, and I might say brave, ways to support people in crisis. And the Lived Experience residential service is funded by the Victorian Government and led by Mind. It's a very innovative trial exploring a peer-led voluntary alternative to acute hospital care. And it was, as you would all know, a key recommendation of the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health and wellbeing system. In fact, it was a recommendation in the interim report. The trial will operate with 9 beds and centre on autonomy, empowering people to make supported choices about their care. And the model prioritises compassion, cultural safety and connection, and links to community or clinical support as and when required. And I did want to acknowledge the extraordinary work of the team behind putting this service together and standing it up at Mind, and particularly want to acknowledge the leadership of Katie Larsen. Thank you, Katie, for leading this important work, to work with our department and the lived experience community to make this a possibility and now a reality. I also want to recognise the remarkable lived experience leaders who will guide the service from day one. One of them is one of the co-presenters tonight, and the new establishment service manager, Rana to Huia, and alongside her, Magdel, Hammond. So I wanted to acknowledge the work that you've been doing. Tonight we celebrate the announcement of the Stratford Scholarship recipient, and we honour emerging peer leaders who will carry forward Anthony's legacy. Each year this scholarship supports new ideas, new voices and new ways of reimagining mental health care through lived experience wisdom. And it's always a highlight to celebrate that commitment and passion. Peer-led approaches continue to be a very important part of Victoria's mental health and wellbeing system, and we see this in our lived experience-led services, including Mental Health and Wellbeing Connect centres, which support families, carers and supporters, in our Mental Health and Wellbeing locals, where lived and living experience is central to how care is delivered, including through a dedicated peer workforce, and in peer-led suicide prevention and aftercare services that are making a life-changing difference in communities across Victoria. Many of these services are proudly delivered by the Victorian Government in partnership with Mind. And we're also delivering an increase in embedded lived experience roles across the public mental health system. And our early workforce data is showing that the lived and living experience workforce has seen the most significant growth in the country. And since 2021, there's been a 125% increase in area mental health services employing lived experience workers within the system. And we're also continuing to support the lived experience workforce, most recently by delivering a new classification structure for lived experience to recognise those unique skills with the best paying conditions in the country. And I'm sure that that will make a big difference when it comes to attracting and retaining peer and lived experience workers within the system. It is an absolute honour to be able to join you this evening. I do have to go to a iftar dinner straight after this, so I'm sorry I can't stay for the whole of the proceedings, but I did want to congratulate the yet-to-be-announced recipients of this important scholarship and this award, and I really look forward to seeing the innovation and the impact this work will continue to inspire. So a big thank you to everyone here for your leadership, for your expertise and dedication to building a stronger and more compassionate mental health system here in Victoria. Have a great event and a lovely evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. So, yes, we are, of course, here in honour of Anthony Stratford, and this March marks 3 years since Anthony passed away. I do want to particularly acknowledge Anthony's sister Maria and brother Clive, who are joining us here tonight. It's fantastic to have you, and thank you for all your support for this event. As well as, of course, former colleagues and close friends of Anthony, many of you are joining us here tonight. I was thinking back to Anthony's legacy leading up to tonight, and shortly after he died, Mind produced a video memorial that provided friends and colleagues the opportunity to share something about him. So I went back and had a look at it, just to reflect on what was said. And some of the themes from that video were things like, Anthony held the hope when times were dark. He inspired a whole generation to do this work. He was a highly regarded leader and mentor. He was generous and he was charming. He was connected and connecting all over the world. He was a bridge builder. He understood the importance of lived experience in transforming mental health systems at a time where not that many people were talking about it, and he had ways of challenging dominant biomedical models that were respectful and collaborative. He understood the role of developing evidence for the lived experience workforce, of thinking bigger and reaching out for new horizons. He was a fearless advocate, had a sense of justice, and understood the need for change. And one of his former colleagues at Mind said, he did it all irresistibly. So I went back and I had a look at a conversation we had over one of the messaging systems. I think it might have been LinkedIn messaging system in the weeks leading up to his death. And I reached out to him because we didn't have that much opportunity to work together. But when he left Mind, he took me out for a scone and a cup of tea, which I thought was nice, and then basically said, you need to sort out the lived experience stuff at Mind. It's your turn now. So I took that on. And then when we communicated in the weeks leading up to his death, he said, Katie, always ensure that the lived experience voice is central when discussing matters that affect us. So there's two things about that. Firstly, what struck me about that on reflection is that's what he had to say in the weeks leading up to his death. And that says everything about lived experience leadership. Because it's more than a job, it's more than your professional life. It's an extension of who we are when you've lived it and when you're trying to understand how to achieve change. So Anthony, I think we can guarantee that tonight we will centre the lived experience voice, but let's carry that forward through the obstacles and challenges that get in the way and in all the work that we do. 2 weeks ago, Mind's board endorsed Mind's second lived experience strategy. This strategy will shape our work from now until 2030. When we launched the first strategy in 2021, we had no idea the journey it would take us on and how much deeper the work would become. The way we would delve into thinking about systems of lived experience-led practice and governance, of the unlearning that we would look at across our leadership and our organisational ways of being, how deep we would go into understanding the support requirements and the clarity needed for building really strong, supported lived experience workforces. Taking the whole organisation on the journey so that everyone feels connected to role and contribution. Understanding that we need much more evidence to understand outcomes and the impact of the work. And most importantly, ensuring that the work that we do ultimately is there to serve the people and communities that access our services. We're on that journey, we have so much more to do, and that is the work that we will delve into in this next part of in this next strategy. The strategy is anchored in 3 core intentions: to reaffirm lived experience at the heart of everything that we do, to shape lived experience principles into practical operational actions across the organisation, and uniting the entire organisation to move forward on our lived experience journey through shared action and understanding. When times are tough, investment in lived experience is often among the first areas to retract. We have seen that recently with the proposed removal of senior lived experience roles here in Victoria. This flies in the face of reform and is a devastatingly predictable system response. At Mind, we take a clear position. Lived experience is not negotiable. It's core to who we are, no matter what the circumstances are around us. This reflects our sustained commitment, investment and vision that future mental health systems can and must deeply centre lived experience, that human rights are not negotiable, that we must attend to how we deliver better outcomes for people and communities, and that we continue that goal of radical systems change. In the coming months, we will open the doors to Victoria's first lived experience residential service, an acute alternative environment. The opening of those doors marks 5 years of deep inquiry, design and development into how to truly do differently. It will deliver an entire workforce of peers and peer leaders through a 24/7 relational model of healing, supported by a lived experience leadership and governance structure designed to hold fidelity to peer ways of knowing and doing and ensure that we are genuinely offering a crisis alternative. The people that come to that service will be our guests. They will be invited into an approach that centres equity, connection, love, community and compassion. It's incredibly exciting, and we will share what we learn as we progress, with the hope of demonstrating both the need for scalability and how we might work differently across the system as a whole. But as much of an opportunity as it is but one service. There is so much more work we need to do to ensure that the opportunities for lived experience are not forgotten, lost or let go of when times get tough, but rather centred in every way we work across this system. Tonight's theme of challenge, action, change recognises that no change comes without discomfort, without grappling with uncertainty, questioning the ways we have always done things. It can't happen without action, not just from those with lived experience, also and very critically those working across other spaces and disciplines across the sector. And that lived experience work is just about that, change. It's not about maintaining the status quo. It's not about sitting too comfortably, and it's certainly now not about assuming that what is right because it's what has always been in place. As we move into the announcement of tonight's Stratford Scholarship and following that, the Stratford Lecture, I invite you to listen deeply, to ask questions of yourself and those around you, and to consider what all of our roles are in inviting challenge, driving action, and creating sustainable, equitable, rights and justice-informed change. I would now like to invite Mind CEO Gill Callister to the stage to announce the winner of the 2026 Stratford Scholarship. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at this fabulous venue. I am thrilled to be here for the third annual Stratford Lecture and, of course, to announce the recipient of the scholarship for 2026. We are very proud at Mind to be playing a role in fostering thought leadership in lived experience through both the scholarship, the lecture and the capacity to bring you all together for events like this. We did establish the Stratford Lecture and the Scholarship as part of our commitment to supporting a lived experience-led transformational mental health system here in Australia. And while it's been 8 years since the Victorian Government's commitment to the recommendations of the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system, it's important to remember that Royal Commission made a very clear case for the primacy of lived experience in the mental health system. And we are trying to bring that into all of the work that we do. But change isn't easy, when I look around at this beautiful building, the zigzagging lines above us bring to mind the progress of lived experience in the mental health sector over the past 8 years. It's been something of a zig and a zag sometimes, and paradigm shifts of this nature are not easy, and they're not always straightforward. But we've come a long way, and some of what the Minister spoke about and Katie has expressed so eloquently are evidence of that. This lecture and scholarship, as Katie said, were established in honour of Anthony Stratford in his work at Mind, but also way, way beyond, both nationally and internationally, started to form the foundations that so many of you have walked on and built since. Back then, the notion of an annual lived experience event like this would have been hard to imagine, but we know he would have loved it. And there's been great progress since then. Our lived experience residential service, Katie's spoken about, the Minister's referred to, opening the doors of that in the coming months is one of our proudest and most humble moments. And we have huge aspiration for what it will not just help show us about lived experience-led services, but what it might grow and generate beyond. But there's plenty more for us as a community to do, and as we head towards a Victorian state election later this year, we don't want to see lived experience leadership falling by the wayside, nor mental health itself for that matter. We do remain steadfastly committed to realising the ambitions of the Royal Commission to put lived experience in the driving seat of our mental health system. And as Mind's new strategic plan for the next 5 years commits, we will continue to drive systemic change through influence, through effective advocacy, as well as through our own work, expanding our lived experience leadership, workforce and workforce expertise. And the Stratford Scholarship is an important facet of our commitment to lived experience and sector reform. It is a $10,000 scholarship for an emerging peer leader or a small group of peers, and it gives them an opportunity to complete a 12-month project that contributes to innovation and transformational change in the mental health space in a way that supports the mental health and wellbeing of people in their own and the broader community. Our inaugural recipient, Mush McLaughlin's scholarship project, explored alternative peer-led responses to suicidality. Last year's recipient, Tabitha Lean, is developing a resource based on her own experience of hospitalisation, and that will be launched at a separate community event later this year. And this year we received 49 applications for the 2026 scholarship. And it was so exciting to see the range of approaches and perspectives of the next generation of lived experience leaders and innovators. And our huge thanks to 3 independent judges for assessing the entries and deciding on the successful applicant. Our judges were Amrita Dasvarma, Melissa Petrakis and Gabby Bruning, who collectively offered expertise across peer work, consumer and carer insights, social justice and Indigenous rights and advocacy. And they said of the successful application, and I quote, "The applicant presented clear connection to community and lived and living experience values. Her links to mob are established, so the project is actionable. This project really grabbed me from the beginning. It really spoke to me and gave me goosebumps. And finally, her plans for the funding are realistic and time aware, and it is exciting that the scholarship will clearly give her a platform to grow and develop those skills." So, I am thrilled to announce that the recipient of the 2026 Stratford Scholarship is Nancy Bates. Nancy is a proud Barkindji. Nancy is a proud Barkindji songwoman based in Adelaide. She's created Black Country, a First Nations-led cultural and music platform that gathers powerful First Nations voices from across generations. She will use the scholarship to support her leadership development through formal training that strengthens the therapeutic and facilitation foundations of Black country. The scholarship funding will be directed toward undertaking narrative therapy training at diploma level alongside music therapy pathways through TAFE SA. Nancy says in her application, narrative therapy training will strengthen how Black country centres lived experience, story and meaning making, supporting participants to re-author their experiences beyond diagnosis and deficit. Music therapy pathways will further develop my ability to use song, rhythm and collective music making as intentional tools for regulation, connection and healing. Together, this training will directly inform the design and delivery of Black country programs across community, education and justice settings. Nancy's goal is to support sustainable, culturally governed mental health practice and contribute to long-term transformational change through community-led healing. And sadly, Nancy was unable to join us here tonight from South Australia due to some other urgent business that she had to attend to, but our congratulations go out to her, and we look forward to seeing and sharing with you the outcome of her very exciting project next year. So please join me again in congratulating Nancy.
So, we have now come to the 2026 Stratford Lecture. In the spirit of the occasion, we wanted to do something a little bit differently. So we invited two people to co-present this evening's lecture. But not just any two people who have recently moved over from New Zealand Aotearoa to work in this space. Firstly, Magdel Hammond. So we first met Magdel as part of the Mind team when we first won the contract for the lived experience residential service. Mary O'Hagan up the back said, you should probably have a chat to Magdel, and introduced us. Magdel then hosted us, a group of us from Mind and Alfred Health, over there, took us around peer-led models, showed us what they were all about. She was incredibly insightful and informative and extraordinarily generous with her time, her honesty about what to do and what not to do, and ideas. And Magdel had set up Piri Pono over there. Magdel's now here, working as the lived experience strategy and workforce manager at Wellways, and generally as a thought leader in the space. We're so lucky to have her here on this land doing the incredible work that she does. And Rana to Huia. Rana, so when we were recruiting for one of the most critical positions for the lived experience residential service, the establishment service manager, we knew we wanted and needed someone pretty unique. Someone who knew what it was to hold fidelity in peer-led models, to run and support large lived experience services, and to stay true to vision while enabling peer-led approaches to operationalisation. Along came Rana, with a willingness to move over from her homeland, bringing a long history of managing peer-led services and an extraordinary heart and justice-centred focus to her work. Some of you may not know that I was also born in New Zealand Aotearoa. It's not super relevant, but I just think given the expertise that you're about to hear from, I just wanted to throw that in. We are so lucky to have both these incredible lived experience leaders, not only recently arriving here in Australia to support critical transformation work in Victoria, but also to very generously share their wisdom, insight and knowledge here with us tonight. So, now, you won't be sitting passively for this session. There's no crowd participation, so don't panic. But if you can have your phones ready, because there will be, as is a very lived experience way of doing things, we will be getting some input as part of the lecture. So you'll see a QR code for Slido. That same code will also, you'll see the polls that you'll be asked about, but there's a Q&A section. During the lecture, please do ask questions. We will have time for a Q&A at the end of the lecture, so we'll have a chance to answer as many of those questions then. With that, I would like to welcome to present the 2026 Stratford Lecture, Magdel, Hammond and Rana to Huia.
Kia ora everyone. Beautiful to see you all here. So kia ora koutou. Ko Rana te Huia toko ingoa no Aotearoa ahau. My name is Rana and I am from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I just want to start off by thanking Uncle Colin for welcoming us here to country. As a guest, I feel honoured to be here on Wurundjeri lands, and I hope that I can be a good guest, and I hope that I can also be a good ally. I hope that I can, be a good ally to First Nations people and keep you all in the front of my mind as I do the work that I'm doing here. So as I said, my name is Rana Te Huia. I am currently the Lived Experience Service Establishment Manager at Mind Australia. Let's take it back home, guys. Okay. I'm just so honoured to be supporting the setup of the new residential lived experience run service that will be an alternative to acute mental health care. I think it's probably the first of its kind here. We have a couple back home, and so I've been really excited to be a part of this project. So in my previous role, I was the General Manager of Balance Aotearoa, and it's a lot of what I'm going to bring here today is from my time there, just understanding that it's a peer-run and peer-governed organisation, and it started around the mid-90s, which was pretty revolutionary. And so, as well as my work at Balance, I've also done a lot of work with the UN DPO Coalition, with Te Pou as the KPI monitoring national mental health data in New Zealand, and with projects from HQSC, the Law Commission, Te Whatu Ora, and a lot more. So, as you can tell probably, I'm very passionate about lived experience leadership. I'm also very, very passionate about lived experience run and governed services because they're grounded in empowerment and understanding. This movement is founded on human rights, on upholding and protecting those rights, particularly within systems that too often make it habit to strip people of these rights. Another reason this work matters so much to me is deeply personal. I'm a voice hearer. I've grown up and lived in a world where people with my diagnosis are often feared. They're misunderstood, stigmatised, and discriminated against. Too often, the only time schizophrenia is mentioned in the media is connection with violent crime. While there has been meaningful progress in understanding and accepting experiences such as depression, anxiety, and neurodivergence, conversations about voice hearing can still prompt concern, caution, and assumptions about risk. When I speak openly about my experience, people sometimes begin thinking about safety measures rather than simply seeing me as a person. I share this with you to offer context and understanding. The only community where I have truly been felt able and open to be able to be open about my experiences as the lived experience community. It was through the support actually of the lived experience community and peer support in my early 20s that I was able to build my life and develop ways of being in a world that often wanted to sedate me or lock me away. My hope is that one day we will see different headlines in the news, more truthful and expansive ones, perhaps like "Mad and Brilliant, A woman with schizophrenia travels to the United Nations in Geneva to present an independent report on human rights for disabled people in New Zealand. Yeah. The issue that I'm highlighting here is not that I went to Geneva. It's that it would take, I guess the issue that I'm highlighting, is that it would take actually lived experience people holding that pen to write those sorts of articles, and lived experience leadership in the media for the narrative to change. And this is the same for the mental health system. What lived experience teaches us is that people are not problems to be managed. We're experts in survival, adaptation, and meaning making. When systems make space for that expertise, something remarkable happens. Services become more humane, more effective, more helpful, more hopeful, helpful. Services, The future of mental health must include lived experience, not at the margins, but at the centre. Holding the pen, shaping the system, and redefining what recovery and human dignity truly mean. When people with lived experience are leading, designing, and delivering services, the focus shifts. It shifts from control to connection, from risk management to human dignity, from containment to healing. Thank you.
That's a hard act to follow. So kia ora koutou, Magdel, Hammond toka ingoa. I too would like to first of all honour the traditional owners of the land and want to acknowledge all of those things that we can learn from them, from their ancestors, from their elders, about how the system needs to change. So I currently work at Wellways in my role as the Lived Experience Strategy and Workforce Manager. Got it? I got it, Mary. And I work alongside a group of amazing other humans in the Lived Experience team. I'm sure you can hear that I'm not a local, I'm not even a Kiwi. I was born and raised in South Africa, where childhood trauma led me to engage with a highly medicalized system, and that resulted in multiple diagnoses, which I won't bore you with. So in 2002, we decided to go and explore and look for a better world and a better life for our children. And we went to Aotearoa, a country that offered me both a home and a sense of belonging, but also many, many opportunities to step into lived experience leadership roles. I was privileged to lead several new innovative peer programs, initiatives, and services. Katie had spoken about Piripono already, so we set up Piripono as a peer acute alternative to inpatient admissions in, I think it's 2013. In the same year, we set up a service called Puna Whakatā, which was an alcohol and other drug respite service, also peer delivered, but co-located with alcohol and other drug clinicians working together. We set up a consumer network called Drive Consumer Direction, which was bringing the mental health and the addiction communities together in South Auckland, creating a platform where people from those communities could come and, get certain skills, learn, get information, look at vocational aspects around how they could step into the workforce in the lived experience space. Whether as consultants, we actually even helped them to actually set up their own consultancy to do that. I helped set up a recovery cafe in central Auckland, which was the first recovery cafe that was set up in Aotearoa. And something I'm very proud of was the citizenship project that we took the information from Yale University, adjusted and adapted that to be culturally more effective. We didn't get it 100% right, but culturally more appropriate to Aotearoa, and renamed it as Ruruku, and that has been running now since 2019, and consistently bring people through into the peer workforce as well. And then another thing that we did was set up a 1737 peer helpline, quite uniquely done. It was done during COVID. All of our recruitment, everything we did in terms of setup was virtual. All of our staff were working remotely. They were employed between Whangarei and Invercargill, and delivered virtual services as a peer helpline and alternative to the 1737 clinical helpline. So some of these were unique and never done before. For example, at Piripono and at Punawhakatā, we had our clinicians, and we had to have a nurse in Piripono, but they reported to a peer manager. That had never been done before. So that was quite unique. Some of them were fully peer governed, and some were co-governed with at least a 50-50 split in governance. So I have experience in operational and systemic roles. The role offering me the most opportunities to learn from what works and what doesn't work in governance was my most recent role when I stepped into the executive director role for lived experience and mind and body, which was the peer-governed entities that sat under the trust. I have been in governance roles for small peer-governed entities, and that's where I met Rana back when I was on the governance board for Balance Aotearoa. Say something else there. So back to you.
So we're bringing all of this with us today. The journey, the mistakes, the breakthroughs, the hurt, the moral injury, and the deep belief that lived experience leadership is not a niche or a nice to have, but a transformative force. Our commitment is to speak honestly about what it takes to build and sustain lived experience leadership and governance, to challenge assumptions that hold us all back, and to offer practical, hopeful pathways forward for organisations who want more than tokenism, those who want true lived experience leadership. So we come to the activity part of our talk. We'd love to hear what you think. So what statement do you think best reflects the lived experience governance? 1, a shared decision governance model where people with lived experience sit alongside non-lived experience board members and participate as equal partners in strategic decision-making, oversight, and organisational stewardship. Or 2, a full lived experience governance model where the entire or majority governance function is held by people with lived experience, including accountability for organisational direction, risk, strategy, and integrity of the lived experience vision. Or 3, an advisory integrated model where the lived experience representatives provide structured guidance and strategic input to governance processes, but decision-making and authority remains primarily with the non-lived experience board.
Katie, do we click for the results?
Oh yeah, the next slide. Oh. Oh.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, look at that! You guys are on our side! Cool. We'll skip before the others go up too much. So, Thank you all for your feedback. We're here with a simple but confronting challenge. What would our mental health and AOD system look like if lived experience leadership and lived experience governance weren't the exception but the foundation? A full lived experience governance model means that people with lived experience hold most or all the governance power, including responsibility for strategy, for risk, organisational direction, and protecting the integrity of the lived experience vision. If lived experience workers deliver services but are not equal all the way up to and including governance, power does not truly shift. An organisation may look progressive by employing peer workers or using recovery language, but key decisions about funding priorities, risk, and acceptable practices still sit within traditional leadership. The system changes its appearance, but not its foundation. Without governance authority, lived experience roles can become limited to carrying out decisions made by others. Workers may become expected to build trust and offer hope while operating within policies, often clinical policies, that they did not design. Often policies that prioritise risk control over dignity and reinforce clinical hierarchies. The language may change, but decision-making remains the same. This destroys the entire peer practice. An example that I'd like to use from my work is that Balance Aotearoa was given the opportunity to staff and run a whole section in the inpatient unit that was known as the day services. It was a large, light-filled space with an outdoor area, kitchen, lounges, art spaces, staffed by 2 to 3 peers at all time. Although it sat within the inpatient unit, requiring ongoing negotiation about how we worked, it became a place where people could relax. There were no cameras, no assessments, no constant monitoring. People could focus on things that they enjoyed rather than being defined by what was wrong with them. It was a space for conversations, creativity, friendship, strength, hope, not just the patient identity. One wahine staying in the unit who had experienced years of abuse and racism in the mental health system spent most of her time in our peer space. She felt safer there, surrounded by her peers. One day while we were in this space, a managing nurse came and told us that we had to clear out because this wahine had refused her medication and they planned to restrain her and administer an injection. We protested, explaining that this would destroy the trust that we had built in this space and went against our peer values and our model of care. The decision was escalated to management, where we sadly didn't have a voice. The nurses came in and restrained her and injected her. This action eroded the trust that we had built, not only with her, but with others that were staying on the unit. It damaged the sense of safety in the space, and for a long time undermined the authenticity and credibility of the lived experience workforce within the hospital setting. I think about this often, and I know for certain that if we really had a voice in higher leadership, this would have never happened. Real change requires shifting who defines purpose and direction, not just who delivers the service. Governance is where power sits, and when people with lived experience are present at board and executive levels, they can question and reshape the system itself. Without that, though, the authority remains intact. Lived experience governance offers a different approach. It shifts power to those most affected. It moves from hierarchy and deficit-based thinking towards relational and community-led practices. It recognises that lived experience is legitimate leadership, not just advisory, not symbolic, but decisive. The question is, what becomes possible when leadership is done by people with lived experience, not for them, and when governance itself becomes a place of healing and transformation.
Okay, so we're going to keep you awake. If you can scan that QR code as well, we want to see what do you think would be most challenging or that you feel most uncertain about in terms of implementing true lived experience leadership as Rana had described, where it is majority or all lived experience. So there's clarity around roles and responsibilities, capability, readiness, impact on existing structures, balancing power and organizational structures and constitutions.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if we look at the results here, it looks pretty much like you are saying number 2, which is ensuring capability, readiness, or confidence to hold governance, risk, responsibility, and authority. And number 5 would be your organizational structure and constitutions, as those being the top 2 with a couple of runners-up. So I want to say to you the challenge is real. Our experiences in Aotearoa also reinforce that there are challenges for lived experience governance to be implemented and to be accepted. If I consider some of the key challenges that I would have identified over the years, I would say one would be that lived experience governance and leadership do not have equitable access to power. Okay? People are put into roles, but more often than not, without the power or authority to make any real decisions. So advising is not governance. We see good intentions, but it's simply not governance. We've seen this in boardrooms, we've seen it in service design, we've seen it in projects, we've seen it in management appointments. The refusal or reluctance to release or delegate power plays itself out all of the time. I've only once seen somebody with lived experience be in a chair, a co-chair role for a mainstream mental health organization. Okay? And once I stepped into the chairing of the seclusion and restraint reduction governance group for one of our hospitals when I was working in the hospital system. And this was frowned upon, and it took them 6 months for discussions at the highest level to get that approved. The next thing I would say is also that money plays a part in power. Okay? It's a key role. Lived experience, leadership, and governance requires investment, which requires money and resources. So if you ask yourself the question, who has the power to invest? Okay? Who's prepared to invest in real lived experience governed options? Next part, I would say people are appointed into roles and functions without the right support or the necessary skills development opportunities to fulfill their roles in governance, or leadership for that matter. Our system of governance asks people to operate and work in a far more corporate-like environment. We talk about organizational risk management, fiduciary duties, we work to tight agendas, and we use formal speech. Okay? Most of this would not give lived experience governance the breathing space it needs to maintain its relational style, its commitment to community and mutuality. And when systems fail the lived experience leaders in such roles, they often carry the blame themselves rather than the system taking responsibility for not changing their approach. So the judgments I've seen has been very sharp, and the support I've seen is very thin. Next, I would say the challenge is of friction, discomfort, and tension. Okay? I want you to sit with this for a moment. So if the role of lived experience is to create discomfort, it's not a threat, it's a gift. It opens the door to honest, transparent conversations and relationships, not mere niceties, because niceties can equal disrespect. It sparks learning and change the sector has desperately wanted for a long time, all which happens outside of our comfort zones. But for all of us working in the sector, where we want to help to change lives, and I put that in italics, we work in a sector that's incredibly change resistant. And I find that quite confronting, actually. So sadly, my observations have been that when tensions or discomfort show up, the system does its darndest to return to homeostasis, which is comfort. That is when lived experience governance is too often also pushed aside. So importantly, it's not all doom and gloom. We have lived experience governance and leadership where it has worked really well. It's improved cultural safety for deeply marginalized communities. It's created lived experience governed policy for disabled people. It helped change policies and organizations to address outcomes for Māori, Pacifica, and other marginalized communities. It has seen clinical staff report to lived experience managers without any issue or any critical events. It has seen communities actively driving the change they wanted to see. I'm going to give you an example. When we established Drive, there was a group of people who were living in a camp, a caravan camp. And just outside of this camp, there were the factions between two gangs. And this community came to us and said, we need to do something different about this because this is impacting our children's lives, it's impacting our lives, it's impacting our mental well-being and our ability to maintain our sobriety. So we used a community development approach and went in there and actually created quite a different setup for that, or they created, we didn't, they created quite a different setup for them within that camp while that camp was in existence. That came out from them, from that community of people who were working within the Drive system with us. We've seen innovation flourish. We've seen leaders grow and develop without facing the moral injury that so often presents when work requirements and lived experience values collide. And these successes aren't small. They're proof that lived experience leadership and governance can create transformational experiences and service options. And it's proof that it's possible to govern through relationships where power is not above us, but amongst us. So I want to take you to a bit of Kiwi information as well. So let's move away from the challenges to the way we hold this, the living image that shows how power, protection, and purpose work together when lived experience truly leads. So when we talk about lived experience governance, we're talking about something deeply human. Something living that grows, that changes, and that needs care. This is why I turn to the harakeke, which is the flax in Aotearoa, a metaphor that holds both the challenge and the possibility showing leadership that is alive, relational, grounded in deep wisdom that's older than any policy. It's a metaphor from Te Māori that teaches us not only why lived experience governance matters, but how it lives, breathes, and protects what is most precious. So if we look at this, I'll show you the outer leaves. If you look at the outer leaves of it, it's the tupuna, grandparents. We see that as lived experience governance. It's holding shape, it's standing strong, it's our making shelter, it's setting direction. That's the peer governance. Not decoration, not a vibe, but real structure that protects and authority that holds everything inside. Inside the middle leaves the awhiritu, which are usually the parents in the Te Māori metaphor. These are the working leaves. That is our lived experience-led work, the programs, the innovations, the community responses, and they lean on governance for steadiness and to lend their strength to what is growing next. So at the heart and the center of the rito are the new shoots and the growth. Our people, our communities, growing voices, growing capability, growing leadership. If the rito is not thriving, nothing we build will last. We need new growth to sustain the sector. But flax, the harakeke, isn't just admired. It is used and used extensively, and the outer leaves are often woven into kete, or baskets. And here's the truth that the harakeke teaches us. How we harvest matters. If we strip the outer leaves, and therefore governance, we remove authority, we starve resourcing, we soften accountability, and the rito suffers. Trust withers. The baskets we are trying to weave for the sector begins to fall apart. This is not abstract to us. My experiences of lived experience governed organizations supported me to lead spaces where the integrity of the work we did were deeply held and protected by the authority of lived experience governance. The outer leaves held firm, and the middle and center felt safe enough to be honest, creative, relational, and truly committed, truly community-led, and we could weave baskets that hold many gifts for our communities and for the sector as a whole. And once that governance was removed, integrity was nearly impossible to maintain. So what does the harakeke ask of the sector? To honor the plant and all its layers, to build governance that truly shelters the work and actively protects new growth, to ensure lived experience can weave the kete or the basket strong enough to carry knowledge, courage, care, day after day, contract after contract, leader after leader. Because when the outer leaves are lived experience, when governance is ours in structure and in practice, the rito thrives. People feel safe, innovation flourishes, and the system becomes what it's promised to be: human, accountable, and effective. That's the work of peer governance. It's not symbolic, it's protective. It's not performative, it's transformative. And tonight, that is our invitation. Harvest with care so that the rito can rise.
So, if we are serious about sharing power, it needs to be real, not symbolic. Respectful power transfer looks like a few simple things. Firstly, it needs to be written down. Lived experience governance should be clearly set out in constitutions, agreements, and budgets. It can no longer rely on goodwill or informal influence. Secondly, there must be proper resourcing. People should not be expected to pay to take on governance responsibilities with burnout, or just for the love of it. If lived experience leadership is valued, it must be properly funded and supported. Thirdly, we need to rethink risk. Systems often worry about risks of sharing power, but the greater risk is repeating harm because the people most affected are not truly in control and the people least affected are protecting their patch. And finally, we must protect the rito. As Magdel described, the harakeke plant, the rito is at the centre shoot, the part that must be protected so that the plant can grow. In this context, protecting the rito means building capacity within our communities. It means supporting people with lived experience to strengthen their knowledge, confidence and skills so that they can step into governance, leadership and service design. It means creating clear pathways into leadership. We often hear the word partnership, but too often partnership actually means thank you for your advice, but we will make the decisions. That's not power sharing. That's managed participation. When we talk about lived experience leadership, we also need to talk about lived experience governance, because leadership without decision-making power risks becoming symbolic rather than transformative. One useful way to understand is through the ladder of participation. I've got a cool picture right there. The ladder describes different levels of participation in decision-making, from situations where people have little to no influence through genuine partnership, through to genuine partnership and community control. At the lower levels are forms of participation that are mostly symbolic. Things like informing people, consulting them, or including a token representative. People may be asked for their views, but the real decision-making power sits somewhere else. In Aotearoa, we often experience, we will listen to your lived experience advisors and celebrate their input when they're telling us exactly what we want to hear. You guys have probably heard that here too, right? So higher up the ladder, participation becomes more meaningful. Partnership begins to emerge, and at the highest levels, power is shared or transferred, with communities holding real authority over the decisions that affect them. If we truly believed in lived experience leadership and governance, then we're not just talking about access. We're talking about authority. Authority over priorities, authority over resources, and authority over defining what good actually looks like in our systems. Anything less risks leaving the status quo unchanged. Shifting authority may not be easy. It doesn't feel easy at the moment. So we need to be clear about where this line sits. If lived experience boards still need clinical or managerial sign-off, it's not true lived experience governance. If funding is short-term and unstable, it is not partnership. If roles have influence but not decision-making rights, it is performance, not power sharing. So we're going to do another little question for you guys. Which statement best reflects your current thinking about lived experience governance? 1, I support it in principle, but I'm unsure how it would work in practice. 2, I feel confident that we can integrate lived experience leadership meaningfully and sustainably. Or 3, I have concerns about shifting accountability or decision-making authority.
Yeah. Yes, that's amazing.
You guys are amazing.
Amazing, fantastic. Okay, so it's great to see that people feel confident that we can integrate lived experience leadership meaningfully and sustainably. That's amazing to see. So some of the things that we're going to do next is Rana and I are going to sort of do a little bit of an interview with each other. We've obviously got the questions pre-prepared, just saying, and our statements as well, because we've also got two people here who are interpreters for us, and they have had a bit of a squiz at what we have said that we'll do in this part. But yeah, we're going to sit down and do it in that way, if that's okay with everybody.
Is it working?
Yes.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah. Okay. That feels like a good point to start with this conversation. So you worked for, as you said to us, and managed one of the few lived experience-led and governed organisations that's left in Aotearoa. So when you think about your time working within a peer-governed organisation that was navigating funding instability, what stands out to you about the strengths of that model? And what pressures or compromises did that under-resourcing create for its identity and its purpose?
Well, working in one of the only lived experience-led and governed NGOs in Aotearoa, the strength was our integrity to the consumer, discipline and community-led solutions. Being peer-governed meant that our values, decision-makings and relationships were grounded in lived experience, creating strong trust and accountability to our community. Whenever possible, we would educate funders about our peer frameworks and advocate for non-clinical approaches. However, funding instability significantly shaped our work. Contracts often prioritised mainstream clinical outcome measures, which sometimes compromised our peer model. And because funding was tied to specific tenders, we had to deliver the work that was funded, not always the work that we most wanted to do or the community most wanted us to do. We tried to build independence through a social enterprise, which had some success, but wasn't so financially sustainable. And ultimately, survival meant following available funding. So while the peer-governed model was powerful and values-driven, under-resourcing constantly pressured our identity and limited our ability to fully determine our own direction.
It's tough. Thanks for that, Rana.
So, Magdel,
No.
you manage the largest NGO, lived experience governed NGO that sat under an umbrella of a non-lived experience trust in Aotearoa. The lived experience organisation was closed in 2025. What was it like trying to uphold peer governance values inside a wider trust structure that wasn't lived experience governed? And how did those different worldviews or power structures show up in day-to-day decision making?
Thanks for that, yeah. So managing those things were always going to be needing really careful navigation between two very different worldviews. And that's how it played itself out. So for many years, Mind and Body, the organisation that was the lived experience entity under the trust, was able to hold the tensions quite productively. Lived experience governance of the organisation functioned like the outer leaves of the harakeke, as we talked about earlier. And the decisions were anchored in peer values, mutuality, self-determination, autonomy, relationships, choice, transparency, for a very long time. Mind and Body was 25 years old when it closed its doors. So lived experience governance grew and strengthened over a number of years. It didn't start off very strong, but it grew and strengthened over a number of years. And started to ask some really tough questions of the trust board. One of the most difficult parts that I would say sat in the relational space. So after many years, the chief executive officer and the chair of the trust board changed more or less at the same time. And this had a profound impact. The lived experience, leadership and governance that was deeply relational with the previous leadership suddenly faced a leadership style that was very hierarchical. So questions asked of the trust by the minor body board became deeply uncomfortable for many, and relationships were not strong enough to actually handle those brave conversations that were needed between the CEO, the trust, as well as the lived experience leadership and governance. So the integrity of lived experience leadership and governance were really compromised in all decision making. So decision making was effectively stripped of lived experience leadership and governance. For example, controversially, I'm going to say this probably, the decision to close that organization was taken with the trust board and the CEO without any engagement meaningfully with anybody from a lived experience perspective. Not the governance board, not the director, myself, the executive director, not our community. That decision was made, and then the consultation happened afterwards. So I would say this, in and of itself, was an expression and a demonstration of the clash between lived experience leadership and governance when executive leadership cultures start driving it from a non-lived experience perspective. So moral injury is something very real for people in some lived experience leadership roles when they face some of this and who are exposed to these kinds of actions and disregard for lived experience values and ways of working. So I'd say the day-to-day decisions informed by lived experience leadership simply disappeared. So I'm going to second your last question. So looking back at what we've experienced in Aotearoa, and what do you think we need as a sector and as communities to protect the autonomy of lived experience governed initiatives and organizations so they can thrive rather than be absorbed or diluted or disestablished?
I think looking back at what we've experienced in Aotearoa, protecting the autonomy of lived experience organisations requires structural change, particularly in how funding is designed and distributed. The funding model presently needs to shift. Currently, the government and health systems, they dictate what work gets funded. That in turn shapes the community or what community organisations can do. If lived experience decision makers genuinely connected to community were embedded in governance and commissioning levels, funding priorities would be more community-led and responsive. Secondly, the competitive tendering environments, it pits organisations against each other. The community always wants us to collaborate and work together. It's better for everyone. But the way that funding happens makes us all fight each other for the funding, for survival, which is, it's ugly. And it limits the collective action and weakens our sector's ability to be able to work together for the community. Mainstream mental health services need to commit to meaningful representation at all levels, governance, management, and workforce. This includes lived experience leadership alongside First Nations, queer communities, refugee populations, youth, elders, disabled people, and others experiencing intersectional marginalisation. Communities need to see themselves reflected in decision-making and service delivery. Without these shifts, lived experience governed organisations risk being diluted and absorbed.
I so agree with you. It's something I've said a few times. It's one of those things, what we've also experienced in Aotearoa as peer services are usually tiny little contracts, and you keep them small, you keep them silent. Yeah, so thank you for that, Ma.
So, as the peer-led organisation that you ran began to challenge established norms within the trust, what did that experience teach you about the risks and vulnerabilities of the lived experience governance when it sits inside systems that aren't designed for it?
Very good question. I mean, I want to reiterate again that, for many years when we had strong lived experience governance, they were those outer layers that protected us. But when power shifted in new leadership, it taught me how fragile and precariously placed we are. I think Katie referred to that as well earlier when she opened up. So when lived experience governed organizations can be shut down within a couple of months and at the stroke of a pen, not because they were underperforming, not because they were running in the red, but purely because of a culture clash and where others held more power and wanted to execute those powers or needed to execute those powers. I saw how fragile we actually are in terms of how we are placed. And I've also learned that lived experience governance is if they're truly doing their job well, but are not protected by formal power structures, it's far easier to discard them than when it's written into larger organizational structures and constitutions that lived experience governance is key. And I'm not talking about advisory functions. I'm talking about true governance. And I think Rana spoke to that as well. I've also learned that it takes more than kindness or goodwill. It asks for an alignment of values between the two systems, the lived experience approach or ways of being in the world, and that system that is not aligned or set up to hold the governance function. It asks for structural protection, and it asks for clarity around power and how it is shared equitably. And I think the equitable part is really, really important, because it's easy to say, okay, we share power, but is the power shared equitably? It cannot be reliant on personalities. That's another thing that I've learned, and a shift and change every single time there has been a new leadership within the system, within the organization, or within a department. So, and I would say structural powers move in different directions, or if it moves in different directions, it needs to be addressed because it's written in a charter or in a constitution. It needs to be given the power to be able to do that. My biggest lesson was not that lived experience leadership and governance is or was flawed, but that the system are not designed to hold it with integrity. Integrity being decision-making power that is structurally protected, being accountable to our communities that we are of service to, the knowledge and wisdom brought to the table honored as evidence, that decisions are made with absolute transparency, and there's cultural alignment with lived experience values and principles, not us having to fit into the system. And I will leave you with a question to think about. If you sit in a situation where you have your part of lived experience governance disagreeing or strongly disagreeing with your organizational position, your direction, or a decision, would their position on that issue hold any power to change things? Because I haven't seen that happen too often. Because I've learned that not all lived experience input is welcome. More often than not, it's only the voice that leaves the system intact that is truly welcome. Thank you.
Rana, Magdel, That was fantastic. Thank you. It was absolutely beautiful and deeply insightful. Please thank Rana and Magdel again. Okay, so we are just about out of time, but we probably have time for a couple of questions. So thank you to those of you who have popped them on the chat and voted for those. So I'll lead with the couple that have got the most little thumbs. So, do you believe there is a role for clinical services, mixed peer and clinical services, and lived experience-led services?
I believe choice is incredibly important, and that is ultimately what needs to drive what the services are that we offer. If our community is asking for a co-located service, then that's what we need to offer. If they ask for a peer-led service, then that's what we need to offer. If we only offer one, option, that's not a choice, really. So if I think of the Puna Whakatā that we set up, people wanted clinical alcohol and other drug counsellors in that service. That's what they asked for in the co-design phase. So that's what we gave them. So, yeah.
Yeah, the lived experience, I guess, community, the lived experience movement isn't anti-clinical services, I don't think. I think it's anti-coercion and pro-choice. That's what we want to see. It doesn't mean that, they can't be present. It doesn't mean that we can't be present. We can definitely coexist. But yeah, there needs to be room made for us now.
All right, another proposal here. What about breaking from government funding and control, which puts doctors at the top, and seeking private philanthropy to run a pure peer-led organisation?
I missed the first part of that.
What about breaking from government funding and control, which puts doctors at the top, and seeking private philanthropy to run a pure peer-led organisation?
I would say if we've got philanthropy available in Australia to do that, because we don't have much available in New Zealand, I would say it's one of the best things that you can get away from funder capture. Okay? We have done something similar, something like that in the organisation where I was at, where we designed something from scratch, implemented it, and the actual organisation invested some of their extra funding that they had stashed away somewhere into that for 2 years, and then managed to get funding from the government for that, or some additional funding. So I think funder capture to me is one of those things that if we can get away from it, absolutely.
Brilliant. Any comment, Rana?
I don't think I could do that with diplomacy.
Okay. All right. Is it possible for non-profits, like Wellways or Mind, we'll include here, or others represented in the room, to have a CEO with lived experience but no clinical degree? I think so.
Sorry, could you say that?
Is it possible for non-profits like Wellways, Mind, Nemai's represented here too, to have a CEO with lived experience but no clinical degree? I think so.
Yeah, like degree schmagree.
That's the quote we'll use.
That's a quote.
Agree. That might actually capture what we need there. All right, and we'll do one more question. Now, I think some of this you've picked up in the discussion. So maybe just this. I'm going to add two. I'm going to merge a question. So, thinking about lived experience governance, I guess there's two things. One is around the requirement for clinical governance, which is deeply woven into the system. And the other is around the financial side of governance. And there's a question in here about peer-led organisations and managing financial governance. So I just wondered if you had any comments from your experience around expand more on that kind of requirement for clinical governance and how to manage that, and also the financial governance side.
Okay, so we didn't really have a requirement in our contracts for clinical governance per se. We obviously had to have obligations that we had to fulfill in terms of safe practice or health and safety and all those things as any other organisation would have to. So our clinical governance didn't really exist. They were quite happy to have a model that was peer governed and that governance sat at a higher level, and that the executive teams could oversee some of the other risk. We had to forward our risk register once a year as well, with the mitigation factors that were in that, but that sat at an executive level as well. Interestingly enough, we never had any, if I think of the services, the peer services that I've been involved with, I can count on over the past however many years, since 2006, I can count on my 2 hands the serious incidents that we've had in those services, if that. So that then when it comes to financial and fiduciary responsibilities, having been on a governance board, I think it's really important to be able to educate yourself in terms of, if you go onto a governance board, in terms of the legal responsibilities you carry if you step onto a governance board, because you carry legal responsibilities and the buck stops with you, really. So I think it's really important to educate yourself around that, know what that actually means, know what that looks like, and be able to call in help and support if you feel that you are struggling with decision-making around finance. We've had to do that in one of the trust boards that I've been involved with. But yeah, the governance board that I reported to had very strong financial knowledge on the governance board, so there wasn't an issue around that.
Okay, all right. We are a little bit over time, but it has been an enriching conversation this evening. Thank you very much for coming along. Thank you for your participation. Thanks to Colin, Hunter, thanks to the Minister, to Gill, to all the team at Mind who have supported this event. But of particular thanks, and congratulations to Nancy, of course, who couldn't be here, but on the Stratford Scholarship. But once again, thank you so much to Magdel and Rana for sharing your wisdom and your insight and your knowledge. It's been really profound and insightful. Thank you. I will just add also, we will have some refreshments at the back here, so please stay, continue the conversation and join us, and we will share the materials and the recording from this evening in the next week or so. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.